uh, Canto,
6.
Canto 6, chapter 14. King Chitraketu's lamentation. And it says, in this 14th chapter, Parikshit Maharaja asked his spiritual master, Sukadeva Goswami, how such a demon as Vitrasura could become an exalted devotee. That's a very good question. In this connection, the previous life of Vitrasura is discussed. This involves the story of Chitraketu and how he was victimized by lamentation because of the death of his son. Among many millions of living entities, the number of human beings is extremely small. And among human beings who are actually religious, only some are eager to be liberated from the material existence. Among many thousands of people who desire relief from material existence, one is freed from the association of unwanted persons or is relieved of material contamination. And among many millions of such liberated persons, one may become a devotee of Lord Narayana. Therefore, such devotees are extremely rare. Since bhakti devotional service is not ordinary, Parikshit Maharaja was astonished that an asura could rise to the exalted position of a devotee. Being doubtful, Parikshit Maharaja inquired from Sukadeva Goswami, who then described Vitrasura with reference to his previous birth as Chitraketu, the king of Sura Sena. Chitraketu, who had no sons, got an opportunity to meet the great sage Angira. When Angira inquired from the king about his welfare, the king expressed his moroseness, and therefore, by the grace of the great sage, the king's first wife, Krita Duty, gave birth to a son, who was the cause of both happiness and lamentation. Upon the birth of this son, the king and all the residents of the palace were very happy. The co-wives of Krita Duty, however, were envious. Oh my God. And later, they administered poison to the child. Chitraketu was overwhelmed by shock at his son's death. Then Narada Muni and Angira went to see him. So this is Canto 6, chapter 14, King Chitraketu's lamentation. Text number 1. King Parikshit inquired from Sukadeva Goswami, O learned Brahmana, demons are generally sinful, being obsessed with the modes of passion and ignorance. How then could Vitrasura have attained such exalted love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana? Good question. Purport. In this material world, everyone is obsessed with the modes of passion and ignorance. However, unless one conquers these modes and comes to the platform of goodness, there is no chance of one's becoming a pure devotee. This is confirmed by Lord Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita 7:28. Yesam swantagatam papam jananam punyakarmanam te dvandva mohanir mukta vajante mamritavrata. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, whose sinful actions are completely eradicated and who are freed from the duality of delusion, engage themselves in my service with determination. Since Vitrasura was among the demons, Maharaj Parikshit wondered how it was possible for him to have become such an exalted devotee. Excellent question. Text number 2. Demigods situated in the mode of goodness and great saints cleansed of the dirt of material enjoyment hardly ever render pure devotional service at the lotus feet of Mukunda. Therefore, how could Vitrasura have become such a great devotee? Ah, yeah, good question. Text number 3. In this material world, there are as many living entities as atoms. Among these living entities, very few are human beings, and among them, few are interested in following religious principles. Okay. Text number 4. O best of the Brahmins, Sukadeva Goswami, out of many persons who follow religious principles, only a few desire liberation from the material world. Among many thousands who desire liberation, one may actually achieve liberation, giving up material attachment to society, friendship, love, country, home, wife, and children. And among many thousands of such liberated persons, one who can understand the true meaning of liberation is very rare. Wow. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are 4 classes of men, namely karmis, jnanis, yogis, and bhaktas. This statement pertains especially to karmis and jnanis. A karmi tries to be happy within the material world by changing from one body to another. His objective is bodily comfort, either in this planet or in another. When such a person becomes a jnani, however, he aspires for liberation from material bondage. Among many such persons who aspire for liberation, one may actually be liberated during his lifetime. Such a person gives up his attachment for society, friendship, love, country, family, wife, and children. Among many such persons who are in the vanaprastha stage, One may understand the value of becoming a sannyasi, completely accepting the renounced order of life. Text number 5. O great sage, among many millions who are liberated and perfect in knowledge of liberation, one may be a devotee of Lord Narayana or Krishna. Such devotees who are fully peaceful are extremely rare. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakura gives the following purport to this verse. Simply desiring mukti or liberation is insufficient. One must become factually liberated. Okay, very good statement. When one understands the futility of the materialistic way of life, one becomes advanced in knowledge, and therefore he situates himself in the Vanaprastha order, unattached to family, wife, and children. One should then further progress to the platform of sannyasa, the actual renounced order, never to fall again and be afflicted by materialistic life, even though one desires to be liberated. This does not mean that he is liberated. Only rarely is someone liberated indeed, although many men take sannyasa to become liberated because of their imperfection. They again become attached to women, material activities, social welfare, work, and so on. Jnanis, yogis, and farmis, devoid of devotional service, are called offenders. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Mayavadi Krishna Aparadi, one who thinks that everything is Maya instead of thinking that everything is Krishna is called an aparadi or offender. Although the Mayavadis impersonalists are offenders at the lotus feet of Krishna, they may nonetheless be counted among the siddhas, those who have realized the self. They may be considered nearer to spiritual perfection because of at least they have realized what spiritual life is. If such a person becomes Narayana Parayana, a devotee of Lord Narayana, he is better than a Jivan Mukta, one who is liberated or perfect. This requires higher intelligence. There are two kinds of jnanis. One is inclined to devotional service, and the other to impersonal realization. Impersonalists generally undergo great endeavor for no tangible reason. And thereupon it is said that they are husking paddy that has no grain. Stula tusavagatina. The other class of jnanis, whose jnana is mixed with bhakti, are also of two kinds. Those who are devoted to the so-called false form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and those who understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Satchit Ananda Vigraha, the actual spiritual form. The Mayavadi devotees worship Narayana or Vishnu with the idea that Vishnu has accepted a form of Maya and that the ultimate truth is actually impersonal. The pure devotee, however, never thinks that Vishnu has accepted a body of Maya. Instead, he knows perfectly well that the original absolute truth is the supreme person, such as such a devotee is actually situated in knowledge. He never merges in the Brahman effulgence, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 10.2.32. Ye ne ne Ravindra Vimuktananinas Vaya Asata Bhavad Avisuddha Budhaya Arura Krichena Parampadam Tata Patanti Adho Nadrita Yusmad Angraya. Very famous verse. O Lord, the intelligence of those who think themselves liberated but who have no devotion is impure, even though they rise to the highest point of liberation by dint of severe penances and austerities, they are sure to fall down again into material existence. For they do not take shelter at your lotus feet. Evidence of the same point is also given in Bhagavad Gita 9:11, wherein the Lord says, Avajanati mudha manasim tanam asritam param bhavam ajanamuto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools deride me when I descend in human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and my supreme dominion over all that be. When rascals, mudhas, see that Krishna acts exactly like a human being, they deride the transcendental form of the Lord because they do not know the Param Bhavam, his transcendental form and activities. Such persons are further described in Bhagavad Gita 9.12 as follows. Mogasya moga karmano moga jnana vichetasa rakshasam rakshasim asurim chaiva pakritim mohinim srita. Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their futile activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated. Such persons do not know that Krishna's body is not material. There is no distinction between Krishna's body and his soul. But because less intelligent men see Krishna as a human being, they deride him. They cannot imagine how a person like Krishna could be the origin of everything. Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Such persons are described as Mogasa, baffled in their hopes. Whatever they desire for the future will be baffled. Even if they apparently engage in devotional service, they are described as Mogasa, because they ultimately desire to merge into the Brahman effulgence. Those who aspire to be elevated to the heavenly planets by devotional service will also be frustrated because this is not the result of devotional service. However, they are also given a chance to engage in devotional service and be purified. as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.17, Shinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtan. Kriti Antaksto Hi Abhadrani Vidunati Sridit Satam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, Supersoul, in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee, who relishes his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Unless the dirt within the core of one's heart is cleansed away, one cannot become a pure devotee. Therefore, the word sudurlabha, very rarely found, is used in this verse, not only among hundreds and thousands, but among millions of perfectly liberated souls. A pure devotee is hardly ever found. Therefore, the words kotish, kots, kotish, uh, apare, used herein, Sri Madhvacharya gives the following quotations from the Tantra Bhagavata. Nava kotyas tu devanam vishaya sapta kotaya narayana yana sarve ye kechit tat purayana. There are 90 million demigods and 70 million sages who are all called Narayana, devotees of Lord Narayana. Among them, only a few are called Narayana Parayana. Narayana Deva Ishi Adyas Tat Parayana Pramadya Kechanaiva Syu Siddho Yogya Sukham Labam. The difference between the Siddhas and the Narayana Parayanas is that the direct devotees are called Narayana Parayanas, whereas those who perform various types of mystic yoga are called Siddhas. Text number 6. Vitrasura was situated in the blazing fire of battle and was an infamous, sinful demon, always engaged in giving troubles and anxieties to others. How could such a demon become so greatly Krishna conscious? Very good statement. Very good question. Purport. It has been described that a Narayana Parayana, a pure devotee, is rarely found among millions and millions of persons. Therefore, Parikshit Maharaja was surprised that Vitrasura, whose purpose was to give trouble and anxiety to others, was one of these devotees, even on a battlefield. What was the reason for Vitrasura's advancement? Good question. Text 7. My dear Lord, Sukadeva Goswami, although Vitrasura was a sinful demon, he showed the prowess of a most exalted Kshatriya and satisfied Lord Indra in battle. How could such a demon be a great devotee of Lord Krishna? These contradictions have caused me great doubts and they have made me eager to hear of this from you. Well, that's bona fide question. Text 8. Shri Sutta Uvacha Parikshita Da Samprasnam Bhagavan Padarayana Nisamya Shraddha Danasya Patinam Nandya Pacho Bhavit. Sri Sukha Goswami said, after hearing Maharaja Parikshit's very intelligent question, Sukadeva Goswami, the most powerful sage, began answering his disciple with great affection. Oh, that's wonderful. Text 9. Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, O king, I shall speak to you the same history I have heard from the mouths of Vyasadeva, Narada, and Devala. Please listen with attention. Text 10. O King Parikshit, in the province of Surasena, there was a king named Chitraketu, who ruled the entire earth. During his reign, the earth produced all the necessities for life. That means that the king and people were very spiritually inclined. Purport. Here, the most significant statement is that the earth completely produced all the necessities of life during the time of King Chitraketu, as stated in the Ishopanishad, Mantra 1. Ishavaishamidam sarvam yat kinja jadat yam jadat tena tak tena bunjtaha malagritaha dasyasridanam. Everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. Well, they belong to Krishna. Krishna, the supreme controller, has created the material world, which is completely perfect and free from scarcity. The Lord supplies the necessities of all living entities. These necessities come from the earth, and thus the earth is the source of supply. When there is a good ruler, such source produces the necessities of life abundantly. However, when there is when there is not such a good ruler, there will be scarcity. This is the significance of the word kamaduk. Elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.10.4, it is said, Kamam vavarsa parajanya sarva kama dubda mahi. During the reign of Maharaj Yudhishthira, the clouds showered all the water that people needed, and the earth produced all the necessities of men in profusion. Yeah, very, very wonderful needs were taken care of. We have experienced that in some seasons the rains produce abundance, and in other seasons there's scarcity. We have no control over the earth's productiveness, for it is naturally under the full control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By his order, The Lord can make the earth produce sufficiently or insufficiently. If a pious king rules the earth according to the Shastric injunctions, there will naturally be regular rainfall and sufficient produce to provide for all men. There will be no question of exploitation, for everyone will have enough. Black marketeering and other corrupt dealings will then automatically stop. Simply ruling the land cannot solve man's problems unless the leader has spiritual capability. He must be like Maharaja Yudhishthira, Parikshit Maharaja, or Ramachandra. Then all the inhabitants of the land will be extremely happy. Text 11. This Chitraketu had 10 million wives. Oh my God, it's unbelievable. 10 million wives. But although he was capable of producing children, he did not receive a child from any of them. By chance, all the wives were barren. 10 million wives, just imagine that. Oh my God. Just imagine how difficult it is to feed them all. 10 million wives. And they're all barren. Text 12. Chitraketu, the husband of these millions of wives, was endowed with a beautiful form, magnanimity, and youth. He was born in a high family. He had a complete education, and he was wealthy and opulent. Nevertheless, in spite of being endowed with all these assets, he was full of anxiety because he did not have a son. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It appears that the king first married one wife, but she could not bear a child. Then he married a second, a third, a fourth, and so on. But none of the wives could bear children. In spite of the material assets of Janmaisvara, Varya, Shruta, Stri, birth in an aristocratic family with full opulence, wealth, education, and beauty, he was very much aggrieved because, in spite of having so many wives, he had no son. Certainly, his grief was natural. Grihastha life does not mean having a wife and no children. Chanakya Pandit says, Putra hinam vinam sunyam. If a family man has no son, his home is no better than a desert. The king was certainly most unhappy that he could not get a son, and this is why he had married so many wives. Kshatriyas especially are allowed to marry more than one wife, and this king did so. Nonetheless, he had no issue. He had no, in other words, children. Text 13. His queens all had beautiful faces and attractive eyes, yet neither his opulences, his hundreds and thousands of queens, nor the land, or the lands of which he was the supreme proprietor, were sources of happiness for him. Text 14. Once upon a time, when the powerful sage named Angira was traveling all over the universe without engagement, by his sweet will he came to the palace of King Chitraketu. Text 15. Chitraketu immediately stood up from his throne and offered him worship. He offered drinking water and eatables, and in this way performed his duty as a host to a great guest. When the rishi was seated very comfortably. The king, restraining his mind and senses, sat on the ground at the side of the Rishi's feet. Text 16. O King Parikshit, when Chitraketu bent low in humility, was seated at the lotus feet of the great sage. The sage congratulated him for his humility and hospitality. The sage addressed him in the following words. The great sage Angira said, "My dear king, I hope that your body and mine and your royal associates and paraphernalia are well. When the seven proprieties uh, of material nature, the total material energy, the ego, and the five objects of sense gratification are in proper order, the living entity within the material elements is happy. Without these seven elements, one cannot exist. Similarly, a king is always protected by seven elements: his instructor, Swami or Guru, his ministers, his kingdom, his fort, his treasury, his royal order, and his friends. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As it is quoted by Sridhar, second, as it is quoted by Sridhar Swami in his Bhagavatam commentary, a king is not alone. He first has his spiritual master, the supreme guide. Then come his ministers, his kingdom, his fortifications, his treasury, his system of law and order, and his friends or allies. Of these seven if these seven are properly maintained, the king is happy. Similarly, as explained in Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yata dehe. The living entity, the soul, is within the material covering of the Mahatattva, ego, and Pancha Tanmatra, the five objects of sense gratification. When these seven are in proper order, the living entity is in a mood of pleasure. Generally, when the associates of the king are quiet and obedient, the king can be happy. Therefore, the great sage Angira Rishi inquired about the king's personal health and the good fortune of his seven associates. When we inquire from a friend whether everything is well, we are concerned not only with his personal self, but also with his family, his source of income, and his assistants or servants. All of them must be well, and then a person can be happy. Text 18. Atmanam pakrit sris adha nidaya shreya apnu yat rajna tata prakritayo naradeva hit adya. O king, O Lord of humanity, when a king directly depends upon associates and follows their instructions, he is happy. Similarly, when his associates offer their gifts and activities to the king and follow his orders, They are also happy. The actual happiness of a king and his dependents is described in this verse. A king should not simply give orders to his dependents because he is supreme, because he is supreme. Sometimes he must follow their instructions. Similarly, the dependents should depend on the king. This mutual dependence will make everything happy. Text 19. O king, are your wives, citizens, secretaries, and servants, and the merchants who sell spices and oil under your control? Are you also in full control of ministers, the inhabitants of your palace, your provincial governors, your sons, and your other dependents? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The master or king and his subordinates should be interdependent, though, though cooperation, both of them can be happy, or through cooperation, both of them can be happy. Text 20. If the king's mind is fully controlled, all his family members and governmental officers are subordinate to him. His provincial governors present taxes on time without resistance, and what to speak of lesser servants. Angita Rishi asked the king whether his mind was also under control. This is most essential for happiness. Yeah, you have to control the mind. Text 21. O King Chitraketu, I can observe that your mind is not pleased. You seem not to have achieved your desired goal. And he doesn't have any kids. That's why he's upset. Is this because of you yourself, or has it been caused by others? Your pale face reflects your deep anxiety. Text 22. Sukadeva Goswami said, King Parikshit, although the great sage Angira knew everything, he inquired from the king in this way. Thus King Chitraketu, desiring a son, bent low in great humility and spoke to the great sage as follows. Purport. Since the face is the index to the mind, very good, a saintly person can study the condition of one's mind by seeing his face. When Angira Rishi remarked about the king's discolored face, King Chitraketu explained the cause of his anxiety as follows. Yeah, he doesn't have a son. Text 23. King Chitraketu said, O great Lord Angira, because all of austerity, knowledge, and transcendental samadhi, you are freed from all the reactions of sinful life. Okay, that's very good. Therefore, as a perfect yogi, you can understand everything external and internal regarding embodied conditioned souls like us. Text 24. O great soul, you are aware of everything, yet you are asking me why I am full of anxiety. Therefore, in response to your order, let me disclose the cause. Okay. Text 25. As a person aggrieved by hunger and thirst is not pleased by the external gratification of flower garlands or sandalwood pulp. I am not pleased with my empire, opulence, possessions, which are desirable even for great demigods, because I have no son. That's that means he's incomplete. Text 26. Therefore, O great sage, please save me and my forefathers who are descending to the darkness of hell because I have no progeny. Kindly do something so that I may have a son to deliver us from hellish conditions. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to Vedic civilization, one gets married simply to have a son, who is needed to offer oblations to his forefathers. King Chitraketu responsibly desired to beget a child so that he and his forefathers might be delivered from the darkest regions. He was concerned with how to get pinda, oblations, in the next life, not only for himself, but also for his forefathers. Therefore, he requested Angira Rishi to favor him by doing something that could help him get a son. Yeah, if a person has no son, then he is incomplete and he is in anxiety. So, if a person is Krishna conscious, or let's say a good person, they will get at least one son. If he has no sons, then that means that he is not what you would call blessed by the Lord. Okay, text 27. In response to the request of Maharaj Chitraketu, Angira Rishi, who was born of Lord Brahma's mind, was very merciful toward him. Because the sage was a greatly powerful personality, he performed a sacrifice by offering oblations of sweet rice to Twasta. Okay, Twasta is a person, of course, and very powerful devotee. O Parikshit Maharaj, best of the Bharata, the remnants of the food offered in yajna were given by the great sage Angira to the first and most perfect among Chitraketu's millions of queens, whose name was Krita Duti. Thereafter, the great sage told the king, O great king, now you will have a son, who will be the cause of both jubilation and lamentation. The sage then left without waiting for Chitraketu's response. Yeah, that means you're going to be happy and you're going to be miserable also in due time. Purport. The word harsha means jubilation and soka means lamentation. The king was overwhelmed with joy when he understood that he would have a son. Because of his great jubilation, he could not actually understand the statement of the sage Angira. He accepted it to mean that there would certainly be jubilation because of the birth of his future son, but that he would be the king's only son, and being very proud of his great wealth and empire, would not very would not be very obedient to his father. Thus the king was satisfied, thinking, let there be a son, it does not matter if he's not very obedient. In Bengal, there is a proverb that instead of having no material uncle, it is better to have a maternal uncle who is blind. The king accepted this philosophy, thinking that a disobedient son would be better than no son at all. The great sage Chanakya Pandit says, Kota putrena jatena yo na vidvan na dharmika kanena chaksusa kimva chaksu pedaiva kevalam. What is the use of a son who is neither a learned scholar nor a devotee? Such a son is like a blind, diseased eye, which causes suffering. Nevertheless, the material world is so polluted that one wants to have a son, even though he is useless. This attitude was represented in the history of King Chitraketu. Text number 30. As Kritik Devi, after receiving the semen of Lord Shiva from Agni, conceived a child named Skanda or Kartikeya. Pitaduti, having received semen from Chitraketu, became pregnant after eating remnants of food from the yajna performed by Angira. Text 31. After receiving semen from Maharaja Chitraketu, the king of Surasena, Queen Krita Duti, gradually developed in her pregnancy. O King Parikshit, just as the moon develops during the bright fortnight. Thereafter, in due course of time, a son was born to the king. Hearing news of this, all the inhabitants of the state of Surasena were extremely pleased. Okay, but that might be just happiness that is going to be interrupted by misery. Text 33. King Chitraketu was especially pleased. After purifying himself by bathing and by decorating himself with ornaments, he engaged learned brahmanas in offering benedictions to the child and performing the birth ceremony. Text 34. Unto brahmanas who took part in the ritualistic ceremony, the king gave charity of gold, silver, garments, ornaments, villages, horses, and elephants, as well as 60 crores of cows, 600 million cows. Whoa, that's a real gift. 600 million cows. Yeah. Just imagine all the stool those cows are going to do. Okay, text 35. 1 second. Text 35. Okay. As a cloud indiscriminately pours water on the earth, the beneficent King Chitraketu, to increase the reputation and opulence and longevity of his son, distributed like rainfall all desirable things to everyone. That's 36. When a poor man gets some money after great difficulty, his affection for the money increases daily. Similarly, when King Chitraketu, after great difficulty, received a son, his affection for the son increased day after day. Uh-oh, there's going to be some tragedy. Text 37. The mother's attraction and attention to the son like that of the child's father, excessively increased. The other wives, seeing Krita Duty son, Krita Duti's son, were very much agitated, as if by high fevers, with a desire to have a son, to have sons. Okay, now there's going to be some tragedy, big time tragedy. Text 38. As King Chitraketu fostered his son very carefully, his affection for Queen Krita Duti increased. But gradually he lost affection for the other wives, who had no sons. So this is one example of better to have only one wife rather than many wives. Text 39. The other queens were extremely unhappy due to their being sonless, without a son. It doesn't mean without son, but without a son. Because of the king's negligence toward them, they condemned themselves in envy. They condemned themselves in envy and lamented. Now, this is a good reason why you should only have one wife. But if you have many wives and you don't satisfy them, you're going to be in big trouble. A wife who has no sons is neglected at home by her husband and dishonored by her co-wives, exactly like a maidservant. Certainly, such a woman is condemned in every respect because of her sinful life. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated by Chanakya Pandit, a person who has no mother at home and whose wife does not speak sweetly should go to the forest. For such a person, living at home and living in the forest are equal. Similarly, for a woman who has no son, who is not cared for by her husband, and whose co-wives neglect her, treating her like a maidservant, to go to the forest is better than to remain at home. Text 41. Even maidservants who are constantly engaged in rendering service to the husband are honored by the husband, and thus they have nothing for which to lament. Our position, however, is that we are maidservants of the maidservants. Therefore, we are most unfortunate. Okay. Well, we should be servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not his maidservants. And Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued, being neglected by their husband and seeing Kritya Duti's opulence in possessing a son, Kritya Duti's co-wives always burned in envy, which became extremely strong. Ooh, that means they're going to do something very simple now. As their envy increased, they lost their intelligence. I'll just say, being extremely hard-hearted and unable to tolerate the king's neglect. Yeah, because he was spending all the time with his wife that gave a son. They finally administered poison to the son. Oh, terrible, terrible, terrible. You see how envy can lead to such horrible situations. Text 44. Unaware of the poison administered by her co-wives, Queen Kritya Duti walked within the house, thinking that her son was sleeping deeply. She did not understand that he was dead. Oh, terrible. Thinking that her child had been sleeping for a long time, Queen Prityaduti, who was certainly very intelligent, ordered the nurse, "My dear friend, please bring my son here." Text 46. When the maidservant approached the child who was lying down, she saw his eyes were turned upwards. There were no signs of life. All his senses having stopped, and she could understand that the child was dead. Seeing this, she immediately cried, "Now I am doomed," and fell to the ground. Wow. The maidservant is very, very dedicated to protecting the son. The other wives killed the baby. Text 47. In great agitation, the maidservant struck her breast with both hands and cried loudly in regretful words. Hearing her loud voice, the queen immediately came, and when she approached her son, she saw that he was suddenly dead. Text 48. In great lamentation, her hair and dress in disarray, the queen fell to the ground unconscious. Text 49. O King Parikshit, hearing the loud crying, all the inhabitants of the palace came, both men and women. Being equally aggrieved, they all began to cry. The queens who had administered the poison also cried pretentiously. Oh boy, that's not very good. They don't mean it. They don't mean it. They're pretending to try and hide their dastardly murders. And the queens who had administered the poison also cried pretentiously, knowing full well their offense. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death from unknown causes, he became almost blind because of his great affection for his son. His lamentation grew like a blazing fire, and as he went to see the dead child, he kept slipping and falling on the ground, surrounded by his ministers and other officers and a learned Brahmanas present. The king approached and fell unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and dress scattered. When the king, breathing heavily, regained consciousness, his eyes were tearful, and he could not speak. Just imagine, terrible. He wanted a son. He eventually gets the son after a long time. And now, because he has many wives, all the wives that have not given him a son, they become upset and jealous, and they purposely kill the son.
Kill the son, unfortunately.
Horrible. That's what happens when you have many wives. Better to have one wife or no wife.
Maharaj, just a time check. It's about 7:45.
Okay.
Whenever you feel like you can.
Yeah. We'll just finish this.
Mhm.
When the queen saw her husband, King Chitraketu, merged in great lamentation and saw the dead child, who was the only son in the family, she lamented in various ways. When the queen saw her husband, King Chitraketu, merged in great lamentation and saw the dead child, who was the only son in the family, she lamented in various ways. This increased the pain in the crores of hearts of all the inhabitants of the palace, the ministers, and all the brahmanas. Okay. Well, we'll stop right there. in this horrible lamentation that's taking place because the poor boy child was actually killed due to the jealousy of the wives that did not have a son. So this is a good advice to only have one wife. Okay, so are there any questions or comments of what we have read so far?
Yeah, this kind of stories we do here in the West. If not between jealousy stories, it may be sometimes among brothers, among all kinds of.
Yeah.
Of course, between the step.
Yeah, brothers.
Yeah, I mean, people become crazy sometimes, and they'll do the most horrible things because of their jealousy, their anger, and it's very dangerous. So that's why it's best to have only one wife. And not play around with a whole bunch of wives. You can't even maintain one wife without having many wives. There was this one devotee. He had two wives.
Really?
Yeah, he had two wives. And he would, in the morning, he would come to the temple holding the hands of his wives. Two wives. And he was very proud of the fact that he has two wives. And then as time went on, the two wives became what you would call lesbians.
Oh.
And they kicked him out of the house. Because, he before that, he would come holding hands with both wives. And, and really showing that, hey, look at me, I got two wives. Eventually, the two wives became lesbians, threw him out of the house, and taught him a lesson not to be, too, what you would call, uh, not to be proud of having two wives. The two women became lesbians and threw him out of the house. Therefore, one should be satisfied with one wife and satisfied to raise the children in a happy family. You don't need two wives. You just need one good wife. That's enough. Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, our takeaway for today, where it says, takeaway for today are okay. It says, as their envy increased, they lost their intelligence, being extremely hard-hearted and unable to tolerate the king's neglect. They finally administered poison to the son. Whoa. That is enough to understand that you should only have one wife, not have many wives, and then neglect the many wives and be a favorite, having a favorite wife and ignoring the other wives. And the favorite wife gives birth to a child, and all the other wives are ignored by the husband, who is so happy and proud to have a child by that one wife. So what happened here? The other wives being so upset that they didn't have a child and envious of the woman that did have a child, they killed the child. And it completely, due to the king's neglect, he had so many wives and he neglected them, because he gave his attention to the one wife that had given him a son. And what happens often, the other wives make a plan to kill the child. What horrible thing that is. But it's due to the lusty behavior of the husband. Okay. All right, we'll stop right there. And this is a warning not to have more than one wife. Better to have only one wife and take care of the wife very nicely and the children very nicely that come, and not want anything more than that. Otherwise, you're going to definitely have a lot of problems as time goes on. You might not have problems in the beginning, but they'll become very prominent in later times. Okay, so we'll stop right there. Our takeaway for today is the following. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death from unknown causes, he became almost blind. Because of his great affection for his son, his lamentation grew like a blazing fire, and he went to see the dead child. He kept slipping and falling on the ground, surrounded by his ministers and other officers and the learned Brahmanas present. The king approached and fell unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and dress scattered. When the king, breathing heavily, regained consciousness, his eyes were tearful, and he could not speak. So I think what's going to happen is, I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember. I think the child comes back alive for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And gives some advice to the father, and then goes and then dies again. Let's see tomorrow what is going to happen.
So we'll see more tomorrow. Hey Krishna.
Yeah. All glories to
Srila
Srila Prabhupada
Ki
ki jai,
jai.
and my dear devotee, especially the men. Better to have one wife and not anymore. It's hard enough to have one wife. Just imagine when you have multiple wives. Oh my God, it's hell. Hare Krishna.